915, which is Delegate Fraser Hidalgo. And you can start. Do you have a panel delegate? All right, you can just bring them up.
Got the DeMarcos. Good. Sit. Thank you, Vice Chair and Chair and members of the committee for being here today. I knew you were here late on Friday, and I promise this bill hearing will be much shorter. Maybe not. Introduce House Bill 915. As many of you know, in the last several years, I have brought, along with Senator Kramer and then prior Delegate Kramer, to this committee a bill on basically carbon pricing to make sure that the fossil fuel industry pays the cost for the destructive practices that they have been engaged in over 100 years, and since they've known about since the mid-1970s. And one of the things through some questions and answers during the committee hearing last year that I found interesting was the idea that that bill somehow kind of worked against the utility industry in the state, which it does not, and it did not for the most part. Anyway, after some long thought, myself and Senator Kramer came up with a different idea, along with several others on this panel, in an attempt to try to exact our pound of flesh from the fossil fuel industry that does not involve Marylanders, Maryland businesses, for the most part, U.S. companies in any way. And that is what you're seeing for this bill. And it's a Superfund bill. So essentially what it does in a nutshell is it goes after the largest fossil fuel industries that are mostly not inside this country, and it forces them to pay for the mitigation that has to be done in order to help deal with climate change in Maryland. And for most of you that do probably already know, the fossil fuel industry has known that burning fossil fuels is destroying the planet and is leading to close to 500,000 deaths in this country every year just through pollution and particulate matter that's affecting our citizens and our kids throughout the country, actually throughout the world. So very similarly to what the tobacco industry did and knew, back in the 1950s and the 60s, the tobacco industry knew that smoking caused cancer and was killing people. And what did they do? They fought it, they knew it, they lied about it, they misrepresented their situation, they misrepresented the facts, they covered it up once they figured out it was true, and then it required the Surgeon General back in the late 1960s and early 70s to get involved, and that's why you see that warning label now on cigarettes. And all of us know that cigarettes are directly linked to cancer. That's what we know now. And we are in a similar place as to where we were knowledge-wise as to where this country was in the 1960s and 70s when it comes to tobacco. Tobacco did this. The fossil fuel industry is now doing the same exact thing that the tobacco industry did, which is, see this shiny object over here? No, that's not it. No, fossil fuels don't cause climate change. No, burning fossil fuels don't lead to pollution and particulate matter. No, fossil fuels don't do this. No, fossil fuels don't do this. Hey, why don't we'll rebrand it, because all of us aren't smart enough to understand what clean coal is. I'm sure everybody on this committee knows what clean coal is, right? I got news for you. It's not clean coal. There's no such thing as clean coal. How about clean diesel? There's no such thing as clean diesel either. These are all just marketing agencies working for these companies that have come up with these ideas and thoughts that are going to sell you on thinking that tobacco doesn't cause cancer, just like burning fossil fuels isn't destroying our planet and costing hundreds of millions, billions of dollars just in the state of Maryland alone. So what this bill does is it goes after those big fossil fuel companies that are outside the state of Maryland and makes them pay into a fund. It also authorizes the AG's office to go after them as well, and it creates a fund that will be distributed, that will distribute those revenues, those monies toward climate mitigation, stormwater management, climate change, transitioning off of fossil fuels, and a significant portion of this 40% of the fund will go directly toward adaptive and mitigating infrastructure projects that directly benefit communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Again, the environmental justice kind of definition we're moving toward. 20% of HB 915 will be dedicated specifically toward helping uninsured Marylanders get coverage, because at the end of the day, one of the big things that I think that we need to understand is that public health is directly associated with climate change. Everyone keeps talking about climate change, which we should be. Everybody keeps talking about all the effects of pollution and the heat and the forest fires and the rising waters, which we should be. Everybody keeps talking about the stormwater management, these big torrential rain downfalls that we have, like what happened to Ellicott City, which we should be. But one of the things that we're not talking enough about is the direct link to public health, the direct cost to health insurance. We're not talking about that enough. And this bill dedicates 20% of its revenue specifically toward dealing and helping folks from a public health perspective. We really need to create that link for people to understand. So I'm happy to talk in more detail, but I think it'd probably be best if I pass it to my panel and note that the utilities are not against this. For the most part, nobody's against this bill. The only one who's going to be against this bill will be like Saudi Arabia, Aramco, ExxonMobil, BP, like those really massive companies. So there's no reason not to vote for the bill. It doesn't affect Maryland other than bringing money into Maryland, which then we can redistribute in said fashion we deem as most beneficial. And with that said, pass it.
Thank you, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Maryland is faced with a choice of who is going to pay for the costs of the climate crisis that are already locked in. These costs are coming due, and if lawmakers take no action, the default is that it will be paid for by Maryland taxpayers and Maryland consumers. These costs are already coming due. Annapolis has filed favorable testimony on this bill because they are paying $50 million to rebuild their dock as we speak, because it started to flood constantly from higher sea levels. That is just a bellwether of what's going to be faced across the state. This legislation would use a Superfund model, a proven policy mechanism that for half a century has made big corporations pay to clean up their mess without passing the costs along to consumers. It would assess a one-time fee on the largest fossil fuel companies, Exxon, BP, Shell, Saudi, Aramco, the big ones, and use that money to fund state infrastructure projects. You know, putting in bigger culverts to handle larger precipitation events, installing air conditioning in public schools that never used to need them. And it would protect consumers because only the largest companies would pay into this fee, and those big distributors would still have to compete with the smaller distributors who are not paying this fee. So if you're Saudi Arabia and you want to compete on the marketplace, you cannot raise your prices because no one will buy your product if you do. These costs are real. Just rough estimates. In the next 10 years, it's going to cost Maryland $776 million to put air conditioning in public schools that never used to need them, but need them now because of hotter temperatures. Thank you. We urge a favorable report on behalf of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network.
And your name, sir?
Jamie DeMarco.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead next.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair and committee. My name is Jose Coronado Flores. I'm a climate research and policy analyst for CASA, the largest immigrant service and advocacy organization in Maryland. CASA is invested in seeing this bill pass because of the health risk climate change poses on the immigrant community and the need for climate resilient infrastructure in our communities. The most at-risk individuals regarding climate change are outdoor workers, sensitive populations, and those who reside in flood-prone areas. Many CASA members are construction workers, landscapers, subcontractors, and holders of other manual labor outdoor positions. Regretfully, they are also among Maryland's uninsured. As temperatures rise and more brutal summers come, they will be at extreme risk of heat-related illness. This bill directly addresses that. Lastly, our members are also residents in flood-prone areas here in the state. Take Rock Creek Wood Apartments in Rockville. This particular complex is notorious for severe flooding, and they've seen it happen more and more frequently. Last year, severe rain led to a death and 150 tenants being displaced. Property damage, loss of valuables, and other trauma evoked by these events, which are forecasted to happen more frequently and more intensely add to the reason why communities like Rock Creek Wood need climate-resilient infrastructure. In conclusion, HB 915 will help protect those in the state who are most vulnerable to the imminent effects of climate change. CASA urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Vincent DeMarco, President of the Maryland Citizens Health Initiative. As you know, our goal is that everyone in Maryland have health care coverage. And thanks to the leadership of the Maryland General Assembly, we are one of the best states in the nation, having decreased our uninsured rate from 13% to 6%, building on and making better the Affordable Care Act, more than almost any other state. But we still have hundreds of thousands of people who are uninsured, and we want to get them covered. We share Governor Wes Moore's goal in his inaugural of reaching those uninsured and getting them insured and leaving no one behind, including people on their health care. The only way we will meet this goal is with significant resources. We were thrilled when Delegate Fraser Hidalgo approached us about using part of this money that will come in from this bill to fund health care. And we immediately helped him crafting the language to do that. And we believe that this is one of the only ways that we will achieve our common goal we all have of quality, affordable health care for all Marylanders. Let's together go from 6% uninsured to 0% uninsured, which of course helps all of us by reducing people going to the emergency room and uncompensated hospital care, which keeps our premiums up. That's why the Maryland Citizens Health Initiative strongly urges you to pass House Bill 915 for the worthy goals the delegates stated and to achieve quality, affordable health care for all Marylanders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. We do have one virtual witness, Isla Shorenstein. Ms. Shorenstein, go ahead and start.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to Delegate Fraser Hidalgo for bringing this important bill. My name is Isla Shorenstein, and I'm the political director for state and local programs at the Center for Climate Integrity. And we urge a favorable report on this bill because we are not all equally to blame for the climate emergency that we find ourselves in. In reality, a relatively small number of corporations are responsible for the vast majority of the pollution that has fueled climate change for decades. Studies have found that nearly 2/3 of all carbon pollution emitted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution can be traced to just 90 individual companies. Companies like Exxon, Shell, BP, Chevron. Maryland taxpayers are now facing staggering costs to respond to a worsening climate crisis, both in terms of reactive measures like disaster recovery and proactive measures like adaptation and resilience that are now needed to defend and protect communities from present and future harms. Our organization estimates that by 2040, it will cost the state of Maryland $28 billion to protect all of its developed tidal coastline and from routine flooding and rising seas. As Jamie mentioned, climate change is also leading to more hot days during the school year. We estimate that by 2025, climate-driven warming will require 274 Maryland public schools to install air conditioning in order to maintain healthy classroom temperatures during the school year at a cost of nearly $777 million. The damages and associated costs of climate change fall hardest and disproportionately on frontline communities that have been historically underserved due to systemic racism and economic inequality. These communities are given even fewer resources to prepare for and recover from heat waves, poor air quality, flooding, and other climate harms. Exxon and Chevron made their highest ever profits in 2022, with Shell and BP doubling their 2021 earnings. Instead of speeding the transition to renewable energy, these and other major fossil fuel companies are using their record profits to enrich shareholders, double down on fossil fuels, and scale back their pledges to reduce carbon pollution. This bill should be viewed as a simple matter of fairness. The people of Maryland should not be stuck holding the entire bill for climate change while corporations continue to pollute, profit, and knowingly fuel the problem. And we respectfully request the committee to issue a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Seeing no questions, that concludes this bill hearing. Next, we will turn to House Bill 793, Delegate Charkoudian. Mr. DeMarco, we'll just rotate through. This is a normal thing for Delegate Charkoudian. Go ahead.
That's a good thing.
Bring your own chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, for the record, Delegate Lord Charkoudian asking for a favorable report on House Bill 793. I want to thank all of you for the conversations we've had to this point on this bill, and I will be relatively brief in my explanation of it, since many of you are already co-sponsors. I want to highlight a couple of things. About what we have in this bill. So Maryland started out as a real leader in offshore wind back in 2010, 2011, first out of the gate. In the time since then, many of the East Coast states have leapfrogged ahead of us. And if we want to benefit from the clean energy, from the union jobs, and from the good MBE business opportunities, we have got to act right now to put us back in this leadership position. And what this bill does by enacting a number of technical reforms that sets the table for long-term investment is it tells all the offshore wind companies that we are serious about this, that we are solving a major problem for them, and that this is the time to come and continue their investment in the state. So the first thing that we do is we establish 8.5 gigawatts by 2031. That's to meet the greenhouse gas reduction goals. And it also is the appropriate signal to BOEM, who's finalizing a lease area, and to PJM, whose cooperation we need to get the transmission done. The second thing it does is we model ourselves after New Jersey's very successful transmission procurement coordination. The basic idea is when you have a bunch of developers out in the ocean trying to get into the shore, it's like running a bunch of extension cords from the ocean into the shore. If the state procures it and coordinates the effort, we run one extension cord out there and put out a power strip that everyone can plug into. It's cheaper. It's cheaper for our ratepayers, and it has less ecological disruption, and it's more efficient. And it solves a huge headache for developers. It solves a huge problem for developers. And so it makes Maryland an even more attractive place for developers to develop offshore wind and to invest. And the third thing that this bill does is it looks at the space that we have left in our current offshore wind lease areas. There's a little bit of space left. It's kind of just wasted space right now. We could have wind in them. But because we hit our ratepayer cap that I support and believe in and supported in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, we have that space, but we don't have a way to procure wind in that space. And so what this bill does is it sets up a new way of doing that procurement, takes the risk off of ratepayers, has DGS doing that procurement. And what's important about that is that we can set this up now. It doesn't require that DGS purchase wind, but it sets up an opportunity for that wind to be purchased. And it gives us as a state a chance to not only fill out those lease areas, but also experiment with a new way of doing procurement that doesn't put the cost and the risk on ratepayers. And it's important that we experiment with that now, because while this bill doesn't set up the procurement for the next 6 gigawatts, in a few years we'll be back here and we need to find the way to set up the procurement for those next 6 gigawatts. And if we try this out now, and if it works, that's great, we have wind, maybe that's what we use in a couple of years. And if it doesn't work, we haven't lost anything, and we'll have to find other solutions to how we're going to procure the next 6 gigawatts. So as you know, I'm happy to talk at length about this bill, so I'm happy to answer any questions, to talk to you at committee dinners, to talk to you anytime, but hoping that you get to hear from this great list of panelists, including Joe from Brattle, who worked with this process in New Jersey, so to the extent that folks have technical questions or concerns about how the transmission piece of it worked, we have that information here as well. And why don't we go this way first?
Fantastic. Good afternoon, Vice Chair and distinguished committee members. For the record, my name is Stacy Hartwell. I'm the chair of the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee for the NAACP Maryland State Conference. I am here on behalf of the conference in support of House Bill 793. This legislation is a meaningful step toward addressing one of the most insidious and entrenched forms of systemic racism, the use of fossil fuel energy. The climate harms, such as increased flooding and excessive heat, are concentrated in vulnerable communities, leaving Black and brown people to experience these impacts most potently and leaving us with the least ability to adjust to these untenable conditions. Further, across Maryland, Black and brown communities disproportionately suffer from local pollutants and other environmental injustices associated with dirty energy. In Baltimore, a city that is 65% Black, as many as 130 residents per 100,000 die every year from the consequences of air pollution. We at the NAACP are firmly in support of this legislation, not only because of its momentum towards ridding the state of dirty fossil fuel energy, but also because of the positive impact it will have for our communities, in particular jobs. Both current offshore wind developers have committed to small minority women-owned businesses. The participation goals, 15% for U.S. Wind and 29% for Ørsted during the project development. We really must prioritize a swift transition to clean energy, and this legislation is a positive step in that direction. For those reasons, we request a favorable report on 793. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chairman and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Edsel Brown, Jr. I live in Lusby, Maryland, and I am the chairman of the Southern Maryland Minority Chamber of Commerce, serving Calvert, Charles, St. Mary's, and Southern PG counties. Our organization fully supports the aims of House Bill 793, the Power Act. Energy is an area that hits home for all of us. It has implications on our household and business budgets, our labor force, our environment, our present, and our future. Wind energy has grown to be a significant component of our power supply and is an essential part of our present and future. This bill takes note of this fact and takes steps to vastly improve the landscape relative to wind energy here in Maryland. The Power Act will, among other things, expand our target goal of producing wind energy to 8.5 gigawatts, improve labor standards, facilitate the construction of a shared transmission infrastructure. Wind energy development is costly and competitive. This bill will make Maryland far more competitive to offshore wind developers to invest here. And improved energy capacity will come without any air pollution. On behalf of the Southern Maryland Minority Chamber of Commerce, we fully support this bill and we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Sure. Hello, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. My name is Evan Vaughn. I represent the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition of over 40 utility-scale wind, solar, and storage companies active here in Maryland and across PJM. We strongly support the passage of this legislation. The bill creates the framework necessary to attract global offshore wind businesses and supply chain factories to the state of Maryland by scaling up Maryland's offshore wind commitments 4 times. That means investment. Previous expansion in Maryland's offshore wind development represents commitments already of $3.5 billion in private investment and the creation of 7,000 jobs. That's poised to grow with this legislation. The bill ensures that Maryland takes a responsible approach to proactively planning transmission grid upgrades. Upgraded and expanded transmission will be critical to decarbonizing Maryland's economy in any scenario, and these upgrades will create major consumer savings and reduce environmental impacts. Finally, the legislation is critical to ensure the federal government is leasing enough land in the Outer Continental Shelf for offshore wind development. Later this year, the Department of Interior will be specifically leasing probably the final lease of these Central Atlantic areas. And so it is not exaggeration to say that without this legislation, it looks to the feds like Maryland has no plans to expand its offshore wind, and that there's a real risk that Maryland could lose the opportunity forever to build additional offshore wind. So again, thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Good afternoon, Vice Chairman and honorable members of the committee. My name is Joe DeLosa III, manager with the Brattle Group and former Bureau Chief of Federal and Regional Policy at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. I'm here through my advisory work for MAREC Action, but I would like to note that I am not representing MAREC, nor am I making these comments on behalf of MAREC. Rather, these comments are my own, based on my transmission experience. Currently, transmission planning performed by the regional grid operator, PJM, for the Mid-Atlantic electricity grid does not consider the needs of state public policies, including offshore wind, unless specifically requested by a state. Today's bill would make just such a request. By identifying a specific public policy need, HB 0739 will authorize the Public Service Commission to initiate PJM's targeted public policy planning process, the state agreement approach, to plan more optimal and coordinated transmission to benefit the state's electricity customers. This approach has also been successfully employed in New Jersey, where the outcome is estimated to save customers over $900 million. Unlike New Jersey, today's bill also includes a provision for Maryland to coordinate with other states as part of these planning efforts. Despite the success of New Jersey's state agreement approach, the scope of New Jersey's effort and the potential for cost savings was limited by applying the planning process to the policy needs of only one state. Recent PJM studies have shown the potential for significantly larger savings when considering the public policy needs of multiple states, which could be enabled through multi-state cooperation envisioned in this bill. Finally, to maximize savings from such coordinated planning, I would like to stress that time is of the essence. Further delays will lead to the best grid interconnection points being used by early offshore wind projects, creating first-mover advantages, but inhibiting the timely and cost-effective long-term development of offshore wind generation, needlessly increasing customer costs over the longer term. Thank you very much.
Jamie DeMarco with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. We urge a favorable report on the Power Act. This legislation is supported by labor, environmentalists, industry, developers, small businesses, justice groups, and consumer advocates. That has never happened before, and we think it's consequential. We urge a favorable report. We cannot meet our climate goals without a lot more offshore wind, and as you can tell by who supports this bill, this is the best way to build offshore wind. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, that concludes this. Oh, sorry, Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. And the question is for Delegate Charkoudian. Just in going through the bill, I mean, there's a lot of language that's already in code, but there are some places where we kind of go through great lengths to be inclusive of like specifically collective bargaining, et cetera, et cetera. But we talk about, you know, what's already in code is that as a condition of the commission's approval of this, it's an understanding that the applicant will use best efforts in outreach to obtain, as a goal, contractors, subcontractors, and/or minority businesses to the extent practicable, as supported by the minority disparity study. And we talk about that a little bit, even on the next page when we start talking about community benefits agreements that include increased opportunities for local businesses, small minority women-owned business. That's already in code. But as we go further in the bill, you mentioned that if there's no proposal that has been approved after it goes through all of this, that a comprehensive explanation of the decision that nothing has been approved, and then recommending a path forward to achieve the state's goal to get to this. But wouldn't it be awesome if we made them do the same thing as to why they have not reached the goals for the minority businesses, et cetera? Because we know for a fact that minorities and women-owned businesses have historically been left out of the wealth creation opportunities as we go through these. And so while I appreciate the discussion about jobs and the 15% goal here and the 29% goal there, I'm really more interested in wealth creation and minority participation as opposed to just jobs. And so wouldn't it be great if we had in here required that they would give a comprehensive explanation as to why and show evidence that they have not if they have not been able to meet the goals as to why and how and what they plan to do to fix that.
So,
Yes? No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, no, I appreciate the
kidding.
question, and some of the other folks who spoke have talked a little bit about the two current companies, and we could probably get the data for you for Orsted's and US Wind's sort of minority participation, minority business and women-owned business participation. I'm sure that can be gotten, so we can sort of see where we are right now. That would be useful. I think what you're asking for is, the report that we're asking for in here is, if they don't succeed in getting a transmission solution, tell us why. And I think what you're saying is, if the minority business goals aren't met as we're going through this, then we want to know why. Is that
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So I need to think about, I'm open to that, absolutely. I need to think about where it goes, like at what point, if it's a, like who does that and at what point is what I need to think about. Because I'm just from a technical perspective. So I'm absolutely open to like having regular reports to the General Assembly on how we're doing at meeting those goals, with that sort of, and why, if we're not meeting them, why we think that is that kind of the thought process?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, well, we'll work together on something along those lines.
All right, thank you very much.
Delegate Howard.
Those reports would be after the fact, I think, and I'm not trying to, but I would be interested in seeing and hearing about the mechanism that would be put in place to make sure that that's happening during the bidding process. So thank you very much.
Yeah, the mechanism that's in place is the community benefit agreement. So that, the mechanism is there. I think what the delegate was asking for is, if it doesn't reach what the mechanism is supposed to reach, if it's not successful, essentially, we want to know why that is.
All right, now seeing no questions. That concludes this panel.
Thank you.
Next, we will go to Jeff Guido, Rico Albacaris, Jim Strong, Sebastian Feculak, and Donna Edwards. And if testimony is repetitive, you can simply say, "Me too."
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having this hearing on a Monday, and we appreciate your time. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO. But also, in addition to that, I'm president of the Northeast Council for the AFL-CIO. That's all the states from Maine to West Virginia and Puerto Rico. And in addition to that, I'm also the chair of the State Fed Advisory Council, and under that, there are a lot of issues, but one of our biggest issue is offshore wind. And so about 12 years ago, I started with the AFL-CIO, the Offshore Wind Advisory Council, and at that time, Maryland was leading. We were the leaders, we were on top, and now, sitting where I do, all of the other states have jumped in front of us. And I'm talking about Maine at 5,000. I'm talking about North Carolina at 8,000 megawatts. I mean, we're talking big jumps. New Jersey at 11,000. So I'm asking you to please pass this, give it a favorable report, because it's not just the offshore wind jobs that we're missing out on. It is the entire supply chain. And it's not just about construction jobs. It is about maritime jobs, SIU jobs, which is the Seafarers International Union. Our Maritime Institute right out here is actually doing the training for how to get things off and onto ships when you go out to the towers. But ahead of us is the Wilmington port that's already building the ships. That should have been our work. So I'm asking you, please, put Maryland in the lead again. We were there a decade ago and we lost. So let's move forward again. Please pass this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jim Strong. I'm the offshore wind sector assistant to our international president, Tom Conway, of the United Steelworkers of America. We're here in support of House Bill 793. Just want to make a couple quick comparisons. At one time, we had Bethlehem Steel that employed over 30,000 workers at Sparrows Point, which is now Trade Point. Because of its steelmaking capacity, it was known as the Beast of the East. Now, that was many years ago, and that's the past. But now we're looking at the future. Because of the logistics of Trade Point Atlantic, with our deep port, the infrastructure with the interstate highways, railroad tracks inside Trade Point Atlantic, we have a chance to create the next new beast of the East, and that's an offshore wind development and deployment. We have a relationship with U.S. Wind, and at full capacity, there'll be over 500 jobs once that operation is up and running. Again, we would ask a favorable report for House Bill 793. Thank you.
Hello, Chairman Crosby, committee members. Thank you for having us here today. Respectfully, I am here to talk about the jobs. That's what we're excited about. We're excited to work on this project and for the type of wealth that it creates for individual families and members of ours that'll be working on it. It's not often that environmentalists and building trades folks get together, so who wouldn't want to be a part of this coalition? That's why we're asking you to vote favorable on House Bill 793. Thank you very much.
Sir, state your name for the record.
I'm sorry, Rico Albuquerque with IBW Local 24.
Good afternoon. My name is Sebastian Fetzalak, coordinator for the Mid-Atlantic States Iron Workers Association. We've been invested in offshore wind for years now in the state of Maryland, hosting one of the first labor-sponsored global wind organization certified training facilities right in Prince George's County, training hundreds of tradespeople for the industry starting this past January. We've also received federal Good Jobs Initiative grants to support apprentices across the state, and we've hired training directors from across Maryland, including from the Eastern Shore, Calvert County, Baltimore, and tradespeople from everywhere in between. And additionally, almost 50% of our new hires are minority members with a path for new work opportunities in this industry. Our facility does train hundreds of tradespeople each year, giving them a career with good, sustainable wages and benefits. We can put them to work soon, but we need to pass House Bill 793. We look forward for a favorable report. Thank you.
Mr. Fesulek, I apologize for
no problem.
the
Thank
name
you.
and pronunciation in the beginning. All right. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we have Maura Cyphers and Rebecca.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, and Rebecca Rare.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm Maura Cyphers with the American Clean Power Association. On behalf of our 750 members across the U.S., I'm here to offer a very strong Me Too, in addition to the panelists you've already heard.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Rear, and I am the Director of Climate Policy and Justice with the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. I'm here to express our support for HB 793, the Promoting Offshore Wind Energy Resources Act. It's a priority bill for Maryland LCV. You've heard a lot of great reasons to support it. Me too.
All right, thank you both. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we will go to in-person favorable with amendments. I have Ryan Opsal and Samuel Byrne. Go ahead when ready.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, committee members. My name is Dr. Ryan Opsal. I'm the Director of Policy for the Maryland Energy Administration. Let me state clearly, we are in support of expanding the goal for offshore wind in the state. Expanding offshore wind is crucial for meeting the governor's goal of 100% clean energy by 2035 and the targets this committee passed in Climate Solutions Now Act last year. A new, stronger goal will provide a base for the burgeoning offshore wind industry and support hundreds of new, well-paying jobs. We also recognize the difficulties presented by the transmission capacity that we have on the Delmarva Peninsula. In order to accommodate additional offshore wind, especially on the scale we're talking about today, transmission capacity will have to expand. We had some reservations about the procurement method proposed in that section, but we have seen some preliminary language that moves in the right direction. I don't believe these amendments are available yet, but they should be available shortly. However, MEA does still have concerns with the offshore wind procurement method described in the last section of the legislation. This section would shift the procurement method from the well-established OREC procurements to a new PPA approach through another government agency. We find this shift to be troubling for a few reasons. One, the OREC process is a well-utilized approach adopted by multiple states, and Maryland has used this process twice. Two, the existing OREC process is managed by the PSC in an open, transparent, and stakeholder-driven process. And three, this constitutes a new sort of untested method just months before BOEM is expected to release new lease areas in the Mid-Atlantic. If we're going to sort of shift the procurement process, this does inject a certain amount of business uncertainty and risk at a time when we're trying to get really robust involvement in the bidding process. So let me conclude by strongly reiterating our support to expand offshore wind in Maryland. This will help us meet our long-term goals while providing a strong new manufacturing base right here in the state. I also have Mr. Samuel Byrne here with me. He leads MEA's offshore wind program and will assist me in providing technical expertise as a subject matter expert on offshore wind. Happy to take your questions. Thank you.
All right, seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Mr. Byrne, you didn't want to testify, right? You're just here? Okay. All right, next we will go to unfavorable. I have Mr. Bruce Bariano and Mike Adams. Chair, pull me aside. I do not see Mr. Bariano, so go ahead and start when ready, Mr. Adams.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. My name is Michael Adams. I'm here on behalf of the Associated Builders and Contractors of Maryland. Associated Builders and Contractors, or ABC, is an organization of general and specialty contractors representing the merit shop commercial construction industry throughout Maryland. Merit shop construction businesses represent 88% of the construction industry in Maryland and 98% of the minority-owned construction businesses in the state. Unfortunately, the community benefit agreement contained in this bill ensures that these construction projects will be directed to union companies or, at a minimum, give these union shops a massive and unnecessary advantage when seeking this work. Specifically, page 8, lines 16 through 19 of the bill requires that any new offshore wind project or wind energy transmission project be evaluated to ensure that developers and suppliers proactively seek to ensure that workers can freely choose to both organize and collectively bargain. It is ABC's belief that these requirements will lead to unnecessary cost, delay, and worst of all, the prioritization of out-of-state workers over Maryland citizens who are ready, willing, and able to do the work. Any Maryland worker is free to join a construction union, and our current laws ensure that our workers have the right to organize. Despite this, only 12% of Maryland construction workers have chosen to do so. This bill, as currently written, will prevent Maryland contractors from getting these valuable construction jobs and make it far more likely that companies employing workers from neighboring states will be selected instead. This proactive requirement undercuts the stated goal of this bill, which is to maximize the use of skilled local labor. The companies which make up ABC can provide this skilled local labor safely and efficiently. It is for these reasons that we urge an unfavorable report on this bill or an amendment so that the language I highlighted is removed. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Mr. Bariano, come on up. Army of one. Go ahead, sir.
I was testifying in the House.
You're good, you're good. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see you walk in.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'll be brief. Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the House Economic Matters Committee, I'm here in opposition to this legislation. On behalf of the Mayor and City Council of Ocean City, you have a letter from the mayor for your consideration. I'll be very brief, very respectfully, and I really mean it. You know, a lot of you know I kind of live in this committee, and I love this committee. This is a very, very pregnant, serious bill that is going to cost Maryland taxpayers a great deal of money. If I read this bill correctly, and I was not here for the proponents or the presenters, so I'm not trying to misrepresent anything, this bill attempts to go around PJM which has 7 or 8 states that they spread costs and expenses of doing what they're doing and kind of create their own PJM that the state of Maryland's going to have to develop at taxpayers' costs, not ratepayers, taxpayer costs, and somehow plug in somewhere in the state of Maryland to provide this offshore wind. I don't see anywhere in here where the owners of these offshore wind companies are paying a dime. I really don't. And I'd like someone to point it out to me if that's the case. But this is an approach which the sponsor of the bill is very entitled to do to get around PJM and create their own network, and then also guarantee that all the electricity that is developed, supposedly, is then going to be sold to the state of Maryland. We don't know what costs or expense for the state of Maryland to use in their operation and needing electricity. And who pays for all that? The taxpayers through the budget that is passed by the legislature from taxes that are raised from taxpayers. My point is, at this point of the legislature, and I really, you don't have to agree with me, but I think respectfully that this bill is too significant to be considered this session and needs a very hard look. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we have one. You all right? It's all right.
I'm fine. I
Okay.
apologize.
All right. You're good.
Thank you again for
All
letting me
right.
speak.
We have one in-person information, and it is Amanda Best from the PSC.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and committee members. I am Amanda Best. I'm Deputy Executive Secretary with the Maryland Public Service Commission, and I'm here today to provide information on House Bill 793. It is well recognized that Maryland is a leader, enabler, and strong proponent of offshore wind, as evidenced by the Commission's 2 rounds of OREC approvals over the past several years. Offshore wind projects are complex and involve many layers of state and federal permitting before they can begin to spin and produce power. House Bill 793, from a Commission perspective, is largely a study bill that has many good ideas that are also complex and require amendments for implementation. The Commission is working with the sponsor and looks forward to further conversations. The 3 major issues I'd like to highlight are as follows. First, while House Bill 793 requires the Commission to examine transmission enhancements, the Commission would need to rely on PJM, the FERC jurisdictional entity responsible for planning the transmission system, to carry out the analysis. Second, since neither the state nor the Commission have authority over PJM, the dates in the bill should be changed to targets and not mandates to allow the Commission flexibility to work with PJM. Finally, this bill will require 4 full-time employees and $3.5 million between the initial study and the long-term analysis. The bill should include language to support the Commission obtaining the necessary resources to implement the bill. Thank you again to the sponsor for working with the Commission and to the committee for your time today. I am available for questions. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Our last witness is virtual. It is Sharon Segner. Ms. Segner, you can go ahead and start when ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Segner, and I am a Senior Vice President at LS Power. And I am here today testifying on behalf of Advanced Energy United. And we strongly support the bill. We will not reiterate all of the comments that have been made in support of the bill today, but we would leave you with 2 main points. We see value in the PJM competitive processes and having strong competition for the transmission. Secondly, we also see strong value in PJM having a strong role in advising the Commission and the use of the PJM state agreement approach for this solicitation. We would close with 3 quotes from testimony that was recently filed on November 28th before FERC by the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. On November 28th, 2022, they made a supplemental filing discussing the benefits of their competitive solicitation process. They made 3 points for your consideration. First of all, they said that New Jersey's real-life experience is that by using proactive holistic planning and competitive bidding processes to select the necessary system reinforcements for multiple offshore wind transmission projects is 37% cheaper than the status quo approach that plans and builds new transmission infrastructure 1 generator at a time. Their second comment for your consideration in this bill as well on page 6, they stated, absent the competitive solicitation process, New Jersey ratepayers may have paid billions of dollars.
Ma'am, I'm going to need you to
more.
start to wrap up.
In closing, we appreciate your consideration of our comments, and we strongly support this bill as it rewards and appreciates PJM's role in the
Thank you.
planning process and competition.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, seeing no questions, that concludes this witness list and the bill hearings for today. Members, give it about 10 minutes and we'll start the voting session. Thank you.